You've brought shame to this family! This child is your responsibility alone!
The sky over the city didn't just leak. It groaned, a heavy, bruised purple that unleashed a relentless downpour. Elena stood on the porch, her fingers trembling as she clutched the strap of a single, overflowing duffel bag. Behind her, the heavy oak door of the mansion she had called home for 3 years groaned on its hinges. "I said get out, Elena." Julian's voice was like a blade, cold and devoid of the warmth that had once promised her forever. "Julian, please. It's midnight," she whispered, her voice cracking against the thunder. The pregnancy was a mistake, and this marriage was a bigger one. He didn't look at her, he looked through her, his eyes fixed on some distant, more ambitious horizon. Welcome, story lovers. Stay blessed, and before we begin, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. The door slammed shut. The click of the deadbolt was a finality that echoed in her chest. Elena stood frozen as the rain soaked through her thin maternity sweater in seconds, the fabric clinging to the slight, precious curve of her stomach. She reached out, her palm resting against the cold wood of the door, waiting for the punchline, for the "I'm sorry" that never came. Instead, she heard the muffled sound of laughter from inside, and it wasn't just Julian's. She stepped back, her heels splashing into a deepening puddle. The luxury SUV that usually sat in the driveway was gone. Julian had sent the driver away hours ago, a calculated move to ensure she had no easy exit. He wanted her to crawl. He wanted her to feel the weight of her sudden insignificance. "He thinks I have nowhere to go," she murmured to the rain, her breath hitching. For 3 years, she had played the role of the quiet, submissive wife to the rising star of the venture capital world. She had dimmed her own light to let him shine, hiding the truth of her lineage because he had once told her he hated Nepo babies and entitled silver spoons. He thought he had married a penniless orphan with a knack for interior design. As the wind whipped her hair across her face, Elena pulled her phone from her pocket. The screen was cracked, but the glow was blinding in the dark. She scrolled past the dozens of ignored calls to Julian, past the deleted messages of her pleading for a conversation. She stopped at a contact she hadn't touched in over 1,000 days. Big Brother. Her thumb hovered over the call button. If she pressed this, the life she had built, the lie she had lived, would be incinerated. Her brother, Gabriel, didn't believe in second chances or quiet exits. He believed in scorched earth. Suddenly, the gates of the estate hummed. A pair of headlights cut through the torrential rain, blinding her. A sleek black sedan was idling at the curb, but it wasn't Julian's. A man stepped out, holding a large black umbrella, his silhouette imposing and familiar. "Elena," the man called out, his voice laced with a lethal edge. She froze. It wasn't Gabriel. It was his fixer. "Is it time?" the man asked, stepping into the light. The man standing before her was Silas, a shadow who had shadowed her brother's rise for a decade. He didn't offer a comforting hug or a warm greeting. He simply held the umbrella over her, shielding her from the onslaught of the storm. His eyes traveled from her soaked clothes to the heavy duffel bag, and finally to the darkened windows of the mansion. "He's inside?" Silas asked, his voice a low vibration that seemed to compete with the thunder. Elena nodded, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely speak. He thinks I'm a liability now. He says the baby will slow down his career." Silas didn't blink. He reached out, taking the heavy bag from her hand as if it weighed nothing. "Gabriel has been waiting for this call for 3 years. Elena, he never understood why you chose a wolf when you were raised by a lion." "I wanted to be loved for myself, Silas, not for the name," she whispered, shivering as he led her toward the idling sedan. "And look where that hunger for normalcy left you." Silas countered, though his tone wasn't cruel, it was factual. In the rain, pregnant, discarded. As she sank into the heated leather seat of the car, the warmth hit her like a physical blow. She watched through the tinted glass as the lights in the master bedroom of the mansion flickered off. Julian was going to sleep, satisfied with his cruelty, convinced he had deleted a minor character from the script of his life. He had no idea that the minor character held the rights to the entire production. "Where is Gabriel?" Lena asked, leaning her head back against the headrest. "He's at the gala," Silas replied, checking his watch. The one Julian was so desperate to be invited to. The one he spent 6 months trying to secure a seat at. Elena felt a cold, sharp spark of clarity. Julian had spent weeks obsessing over the Titan Circle event, complaining that he was still one tier away from the elite. He had no idea that the man hosting it shared the same blood as the woman he had just shoved into the mud. "Silas," Elena said, her voice gaining a sudden newfound steadiness. "I don't want to go to the penthouse. I don't want to hide." Silas looked at her through the rear-view mirror. "What are you suggesting?" "Julian took my keys. He took my dignity. He thinks he stripped me down to nothing." She looked at her reflection in the window, pale, wet, but her eyes were beginning to burn. "Take me to the gala. I need to see my brother." "You're in no condition." "I am in exactly the right condition," she interrupted. "I am a woman who has nothing left to lose and a name to reclaim." Silas stared at her for a long beat. Then a ghost of a smile touched his lips. He picked up his phone. "Change of plans. Prepare the diamond suite at the venue. The princess is coming home." Just as the car began to pull away, Elena's phone buzzed. A text from Julian. "Don't bother coming back for the rest of your things. They're in the trash." Elena didn't cry. She deleted the contact. The Grand Regency Ballroom was a cathedral of glass and gold, humming with the soft clink of crystal and the hushed negotiations of the world's most powerful people. Julian stood at the edge of the bar, straightening his silk tie, a glass of vintage scotch in his hand. He felt untouchable. Removing the weight of Elena had felt like shedding a lead coat. He was here, among the Titans, ready to pitch his latest venture to the man who could make or break his future. "Gabriel Thorne, have you seen him yet?" Julian's colleague, Marcus, whispered. "Thorne is in the VIP lounge. They say he's in a foul mood tonight. Someone crossed a line with his family." Julian chuckled, a smug, dark sound. "Men like Thorne don't have emotions, Marcus. They have interests. I just need 5 minutes to show him how I can increase his bottom line." "I heard his sister is back in town," Marcus added, scanning the room. "The mysterious one. If you could get an introduction to her, you wouldn't even need a pitch." Julian waved a hand dismissively. "I'm done with women for a while. They're distractions, especially the ones who think a marriage certificate is a retirement plan." He checked his watch, the very one Elena had saved up for a year to buy him for their first anniversary. He looked at it with disdain. He'd be replacing it with a Patek Philippe by Monday. Suddenly, the atmospheric music in the ballroom faltered, then stopped. The heavy double doors at the top of the grand staircase creaked open. A hush swept through the room like a physical wave. Julian turned, expecting Gabriel Thorne, but the figure that emerged stole the breath from his lungs. It was a woman. She was draped in a floor-length gown of midnight blue silk that shimmered like oil on water. Her hair, which had been damp and matted only an hour ago, was now swept up in a sophisticated architectural crown. Diamonds that cost more than Julian's entire firm sparkled at her throat. But it was her face that stopped his heart. Elena. Julian gasped, the scotch sloshing over the rim of his glass. She descended the stairs with a predatory grace he had never seen. She wasn't the trembling girl he had shoved into the rain. She was a statue carved from ice. Beside her walked Silas, no longer a driver, but a sentinel in a custom tuxedo. Julian took a step forward, his mind reeling. It's a mistake. It's a look-alike. But then she turned her gaze toward the crowd, and her eyes locked onto his. There was no love there. There wasn't even hate. There was only the cold, hard stare of a creditor coming to collect a debt. As she reached the bottom step, a man emerged from the VIP shadows. Gabriel Thorne, the most feared CEO in the hemisphere, walked directly to her. The room held its breath. Gabriel didn't shake her hand. He kissed her forehead and tucked her arm firmly into his. "You're late." Gabriel's voice boomed through the silent hall. "I had to take out the trash," Elena replied, her voice carrying perfectly to Julian's ears. Julian's glass shattered on the marble floor. The sound of the shattering glass was an exclamation point in the silence. Julian stood paralyzed, the sting of expensive scotch soaking into his trousers, but he didn't feel it. All he felt was the suffocating weight of 1,000 eyes turning toward him. He watched, horrified, as Gabriel Thorne, a man known for his calculated cruelty, leaned down to whisper something in Elena's ear, his hand protective over hers. "Julian, is that your wife?" Aku stammered, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. Julian couldn't find his voice. His mind scrambled to reconstruct the last 3 years. The modest background she'd claimed, the quiet holidays, the way she had never asked for anything. It wasn't humility. It was a disguise. He had been playing checkers with a woman whose family owned the board. Elena began to move through the crowd, Gabriel at her side. They weren't just walking, they were patrolling. Every person she passed bowed their heads slightly, a silent acknowledgement of the Thorne bloodline. When she finally reached the center of the room, only 5 feet from where Julian stood, she stopped. "Mr. Thorne." Julian blurted out, the instinct to survive overriding his shock. "Gabriel? There's been a massive misunderstanding." Gabriel didn't even look at him. He adjusted his cufflink, his expression bored. "I don't believe I invited any mid-level fund managers to this circle tonight. Silas, how did this person get past the gate?" "He was on the potential list, sir," Silas replied from the shadows. "Before we updated the criteria." Elena stepped forward, her blue silk gown whispering against the floor. She looked at Julian's disheveled appearance, the wet hem of his pants, the panicked sweat on his brow. For the first time, the power dynamic was visible to everyone in the room. "You look stressed," Julian, Elena said softly. Her voice was steady, devoid of the tremors from the porch. "Is it the rain? It really is dreadful out there tonight." "Elena, honey, let's talk privately," Julian hissed, reaching out to grab her arm. Before his fingers could even graze her silk sleeve, Silas was there. He didn't draw a weapon. He simply placed a hand on Julian's chest, a silent wall of muscle. "Don't," Elena said, her eyes flashing. "You've spent 3 years touching things that didn't belong to you. My time, my energy, my heart. You're done." "I'm your husband," Julian shouted, desperation making him bold. "I have rights." "Actually," Gabriel intervened, finally looking at Julian with a gaze that felt like a death sentence. "In the state of this jurisdiction, man who forcibly evicts his pregnant wife from their primary residence at midnight has very few rights left, especially when I own the bank that holds the mortgage on that residence." The room gasped. Julian's face went white. You own the bank?" "I own the street you live on, Julian," Gabriel said. "And as of 5 minutes ago, I've decided to redevelop it." Just as Julian opened his mouth to plead, a waiter approached Gabriel and whispered in his ear. Gabriel's expression shifted from bored to lethal. "It seems," Gabriel said, looking at Elena, "that Julian's mistress has arrived at the front gate, demanding to be let in. She says he promised her your jewelry." Elena's hand went instinctively to her stomach. The betrayal was a physical ache, but she forced a smile. "Let her in, Gabe. I want her to see this." The doors opened again, but this time the entrance was far from elegant. Lydia, a woman Elena recognized as Julian's indispensable marketing consultant, strode in with a look of frantic entitlement. She was wearing one of Elena's vintage silk scarves, a piece handed down from their grandmother. The sight of it made Elena's blood run cold, then boil. Lydia stopped dead when she saw the sea of tuxedos and the predatory glint of the Thorne siblings. She looked at Julian, who was trembling, then at Elena, who looked like a queen. "Julian, what's going on?" Lydia demanded, her voice shrill in the cavernous room. "The guards at the house told me the locks were being changed. I thought you said she was gone for good." "Shut up, Lydia," Julian hissed. But it was too late. The room erupted in a low, judgmental murmur. The business consultant was wearing the wife's clothes while the wife stood there, pregnant and flanked by the most powerful man in the city. The moral scales didn't just tip, they crashed. Elena took a step toward Lydia. She didn't look at the woman with jealousy, but with a profound, chilling pity. "That scarf looks better on someone with a spine, Lydia. But keep it. Consider it a parting gift from the estate you'll never step foot in again." "Elena!" Wait, Julian tried to move, but Gabriel's hand dropped onto his shoulder like a vice. "My sister is speaking," Gabriel said, his voice a low growl. Elena turned back to Julian. "You told me I was a mistake. You told me this child would ruin your career." She scanned the room, making eye contact with the board members of the firms Julian was desperate to impress. "Does anyone here want to invest in a man who throws his pregnant wife into a storm to make room for a thief? Does his vision for the future include abandoning his own blood when it becomes inconvenient?" The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. One by one, the men Julian had spent years courting turned their backs. They didn't just leave the conversation, they physically rotated away, erasing him from the social fabric of the city. "You're destroying me," Julian whispered, the reality finally sinking in. "Everything I worked for, ... "You didn't work for this," Elena corrected him, her voice ringing with a terrifying clarity. "You traded for it. You traded my silence and my support for your ego. But the market has closed, Julian." Suddenly, the lights in the ballroom flickered. A security guard rushed over to Silas, whispering urgently. Silas looked at Gabriel and gave a sharp nod. "Is there a problem?" Elena asked, noticing the shift in her brother's posture. "A small one," Gabriel said, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the entrance. "It seems Julian didn't just steal your heart, Elena. He's been stealing from the firm. And the authorities are downstairs." Julian's eyes went wide. He looked toward the exit, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He went to run, but the doors swung open once more, revealing a line of uniformed officers. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed against the marble floor, a sound far more permanent than the slamming of the mansion door. Julian's hands were pulled behind his back as the lead investigator stepped forward, holding a thick folder. "Julian Vance," the officer stated, "you are under arrest for corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and the systematic misappropriation of funds from the Thorne family's secondary holdings." Julian looked at Elena, his face a mask of sweating desperation. "Elena, tell them it's all a mistake. I only moved the money to secure our future." For the baby, Elena didn't flinch. She watched him with a clinical detachment that made her feel older than her years. "The baby you called a mistake an hour ago. The future you tried to build by erasing mine." She stepped closer, her shadow falling over him as he was forced to his knees. "You didn't move money for us, Julian. You moved it to pay off Lydia's gambling debts and to buy a penthouse in your name only. I've known for months." The room inhaled sharply. Gabriel looked at his sister, a flash of genuine surprise crossing his features. He hadn't known she was this far ahead. "You knew?" Julian gasped. "Then why stay?" "Why let me? Because I needed to see if you had a bottom," Elena interrupted, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. "I wanted to see if there was a single shred of the man I loved left in you. Tonight, in the rain, you showed me there was nothing but a void." Lydia tried to slip away through the crowd, but Silas stepped into her path, his arms crossed over his chest. "Not so fast, Miss Vance, or should I say, Miss Miller. The police have questions about your consulting fees as well. As the officers began to lead Julian away, he began to scream. It was a pathetic, high-pitched sound, the sound of a man who realized he had traded a diamond for a handful of gravel. He looked back at the Thorne siblings, Gabriel, the king of the city, and Elena, the woman he had treated like a doormat. "You trapped me," Julian yelled as he was dragged toward the stairs. "You set me up." "No, Julian," Gabriel called out, his voice booming with a cold finality. "You trapped yourself. You just didn't realize the cage was made of your own greed." The doors closed behind the police, leaving the ballroom in a stunned, vibrating silence. Elena felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. The adrenaline that had carried her from the porch to the gala was beginning to ebb, leaving a hollow ache in its place. Gabriel reached out, steadying her. "It's over, Elle. He's gone." "Is it?" she asked, her hand resting on her stomach. "He's gone, but the wreckage is still here." "Not for long," Gabriel promised. He turned to the crowd, his eyes daring anyone to speak. "The gala is over. My sister needs to rest." As the guests scrambled to leave, Elena's phone chimed in her clutch. It was an automated alert from her bank, the one Gabriel owned. A massive transfer had just been flagged. Elena stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in her eyes. The alert showed a transfer of several $1,000,000, not an exit, but an entry. Julian had attempted a final, desperate kill switch move to offshore the last of his stolen liquidity, but Gabriel's systems had intercepted it. The money hadn't gone to a tax haven. It had been redirected into a trust fund for her unborn child. "He tried to empty the accounts on his way out," Gabriel said, glancing at the phone. "I had Silas reroute the packets. Consider it back pay for every tear you wasted on him." Elena let out a long, shaky breath. "I don't want his money, Gabe. It's not his. It's the profit he made off your family's name," Gabriel countered. He looked at her closely, the protective older brother finally softening his sharp edges. "You're pale. We should get you to the clinic for a checkup. The stress of tonight." "The stress of tonight is the first time I've felt alive in years," Elena interrupted, standing taller. She looked around the emptying ballroom. The gold leaf and the crystal now looked like what they were, props in a play she was no longer interested in performing. "I'm not a fragile porcelain doll, Gabriel. Stop looking at me like I'm going to break." "Oh, you were standing in a storm 2 hours ago," he reminded her. "And now I am the storm," she replied, a faint, sharp smile touching her lips. As they walked toward the private exit, a man stepped out from the shadows near the coat check. It was Marcus, Julian's former colleague. He looked terrified, clutching his briefcase as if it could shield him from Gabriel's wrath. "Elena, I mean?" "Mrs. Vance, Miss Thorne," Marcus stammered. "I had no idea what he was doing. I have records. I have files on the vendors he was using to launder the cash. I can help the prosecution." Elena stopped and looked at him. Marcus had been at their dinner table dozens of times. He had watched Julian belittle her and had laughed at the jokes. He had seen the bruising words and looked at his plate. "You had 3 years to help, Marcus," Elena said, her voice dripping with a quiet, lethal disappointment. "You didn't stay silent because you were ignorant. You stayed silent because you were waiting to see who would win." "I have a family," Marcus pleaded. "So do I," Elena said, her hand resting firmly on her stomach. "And mine doesn't include people who watch from the sidelines." "Give the files to Silas. If they're useful, maybe my brother won't buy your firm just to fire you. But don't ever say my name again." Marcus nodded frantically and scrambled away. Elena felt a strange sense of peace. The fear she had lived with, the fear of not being enough, of being discarded, had been replaced by a cold, hard clarity. What now? Gabriel asked as they reached the car. "Now," Elena said, looking up at the rain that was finally beginning to tap out against the glass awning. "I want to go back to the house. I have one more thing to do before the locks are changed for good. The house is a crime scene, Elle." "No," she said. "It's a memory. and I'm going to burn it down. The mansion looked different under the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers parked down the street. The rain had slowed to a rhythmic drizzle, tapping against the windshield as the black sedan pulled up to the curb. Elena stepped out, refusing Silas's hand. She walked up the stone path she had scrubbed herself when Julian wanted to save on expenses, her eyes fixed on the front door. Inside, the silence was heavy. The scent of Julian's expensive cologne still lingered in the foyer, a ghost of a man who no longer existed in her world. Elena walked through the rooms, seeing the life she had carefully curated. Every vase, every painting, every rug had been chosen to please a man who had never truly seen her. She stopped in the nursery. It was half finished, the wallpaper peeling at the corners where she had been too tired to continue.
She sat in the rocking chair, the wood creaking beneath her. "You'll never have to wonder if you're wanted," she whispered, her hand flat against her belly. "You are a thorn. But more importantly, you are mine." She stood up and walked to the master wall safe, hidden behind a landscape painting. She punched in a code Julian didn't know she had the date of her own mother's passing. The door clicked open. Inside wasn't money or jewelry, but a single leather-bound ledger. It was her own work, her designs, her business plans, and the proof of the intellectual property Julian had stolen and rebranded as his own. She tucked the ledger under her arm and walked back to the foyer. On the mahogany hall table sat the divorce papers Julian had tried to force her to sign weeks ago, the ones that would have left her with nothing. She picked up a pen and signed them, but not with the trembling hand of a victim. She signed them with the flourish of a woman closing a business deal. At the bottom of the page, she scribbled a final note. "I didn't lose a husband. I gained a kingdom. Don't look for us." She walked out the front door, leaving it wide open. She didn't need to lock it. There was nothing left inside worth stealing. Gabriel was waiting by the car, leaning against the door. He watched her approach. Seeing the way she carried herself, no longer the girl in the rain, but a woman who had found her own North Star. "Is it done?" he asked. "It's just beginning," Elena replied. She looked back at the house one last time. "Cruelty is loud, Gabe, but self-respect is quiet. I'm ready to be quiet for a while. I'm ready to build something that actually belongs to me." As the car pulled away, the first light of dawn began to crack through the gray clouds. The storm was over. Elena leaned back into the seat, feeling the steady, strong heartbeat of her child. She had been kicked out into the rain, but she had returned with the sun.